And at this time, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who come in late, we are now having a little cooking session right here on the scene, putting the pot on in here. And we like for you to join in with us and have a ball.
Hi, this is Dara. Welcome back to our web product series. This time we're going to be talking about our style guides, which is the last section of our web product universe here. I put here as inspiration MailChimp. I think that they do a fantastic job. They're one of my favorites for how do you set up documentation for your brand, your content style guidelines, and your design guidelines, as well as their UX patterns. In this particular world of our web product, I would want these things to be here. So brand guidelines, voice and tone, design aesthetics. And this is something that the team should be aware of, they should be using, they should be reflecting upon it. And so that should live here. But it's actually a very different process to build these three things out than it is to build out the rest of it really is a different process than it is to build out the rest of our web product. Even design libraries in themselves are a little more complex. It's not as straightforward, but there's still something that's done alongside with, or should be done alongside with, doing your web products. So we're going to dive in, and here what I'm going to do as I build this is that I'm creating a wiki which will make it easy for users to come in and read the style guidelines, but at the same time I'm creating this production environment that's going to help us keep track the status of, if something is complete or not. And by track, I mean the document status, not the actual creation of the design of that thing, but the document of the specifications. So if I'm designing out, like we showed before, we're working on a recipe page. If I'm designing the recipe page, that has its own stream that's going through our sprint process. But then the documentation, which should be a sprint item, like I should be taking a sprint to document that design. That's going to be part of what's in the library, where I want to say what's the status of that completion of the documentation, so I know how to pull it out into this library. That sounds confusing, I know, the way I just said it, but as I go through it'll make sense what I'm talking about. So what is a pattern library? Why do you need it? A pattern library really helps you to keep consistency. That's the number one word about a library: consistency. Consistency in, your colors and typography and iconography, even your social icons. I can't tell you how many sites where I've seen you go from page to page and they might be using one version of an icon with Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, etc., etc., etc. And then you go to another section, they're using a whole other scheme of social icons. Button treatments, have changed throughout the site. So this helps to be consistent. We've got our button styles and we're always using the same button styles. It makes sure that our UI components, even if we skin them to be visually different, they still have the same basic functionality. So, there's only so many different ways you could do a product catalog gallery, for example. If you're doing it was another word for a carousel. There's only so many different ways that you should be doing a carousel on a site, maybe 2 or 3 ways. But I remember working at AOL, we had 25 different carousels, each with their own separate functionality. But when you looked at them, there are only slight differences. So consolidating that to the smallest number that you actually need, and then you can style them differently for that use case in your site if need be, or maybe they're all styled the same. Your coding practices, so that you make sure your class names and stuff support a structure of a site where it's easy. You shouldn't have the same element have completely different class systems as you move from page to page, because then that means if you have global changes, you have to go page by page to make those changes. A lot of the work that my team inherits, when we go to make these changes, we have to go in page by page to make changes to things that were exactly the same. Maybe we're just changing color, but we got to go page by page instead of going to some kind of global space and saying, all the color for all carousels should now be orange where they used to be green, right? So pattern libraries help us do that. Pattern libraries actually involve all the different SMEs of your team. So your front-end developers, your back-end developers, your UI designers, your graphic specialists, your accessibility specialists, your content specialists, like all those people should be involved with your library. That being said, usually on my teams, the UX team leads the library effort, only because we're the ones who create the first, we're the first at bat creating the design. So we are documenting our design. But then after I've documented my design, I want those other specialties to come in and make sure that they, add to or fix the things that I've stated about how that thing works. So I do work very collaboratively. So before a design even gets to the library, it gets to being something that's going to go into the library, I've already had all those individuals as part of the process. So we already know that the development team is on board with building what we build. For instance, we're not putting something in the library that's just not doable for our particular, scope, price, structure, whatever. We already know that it should work, but maybe the way that I described it functioning is not the way the developer sees it functioning, or maybe I don't even know how to describe it, and so I need the developer to come in there. I want our accessibility specialist to come in and say, like, yeah, if you build it in this way, it will be accessible. So those are the kinds of things that I want to capture in here, and I need all of the team to help with that, all the librarians to be involved. So it is not a single individual effort, nor is it a single team, subject matter expert effort. It really is a team effort. Everybody should be involved in your library. So the library you're seeing here, this is going to be the process. We're building a library from scratch. It doesn't exist at all. As we're finishing stuff, they're going to end up in pages on the wiki themselves. But there's also going to be a part of the library where there's maintenance. So once we've finished the first effort, there's going to be new patterns that come around that we want to apply to the library, where we're going to make sure, is it something we're really going to use, or is it a one-time thing? Is it, clean it up and put it in the library? Are the things that have fallen out of favor we want to remove from the library? And then after that, this structure you see here, this is kind of what I envision as the best case scenario for a library. But that being said, libraries are very cultural to the team that's building them. So for instance, I have one client now where they want their individual pages to be very unique. So they don't have page templates. They have, still the rest of it, elements, components, even in responsive layouts. And they will say okay, I want to, when they go to put a page, they'll say, what components do we have already that will express the content in the way we want to express it? And they'll use this to help them build their page. If that component doesn't exist, then they say, is this a new component? And is it a library thing that we should be adding, or is this really a one-off case for this particular instance? I'd say once you use something twice, it is a library element. It should be added to the library. But when you use something for the first time, you should evaluate, is this something we think that we will use again, and in which case it should go into the library. And then some strict libraries where it doesn't matter if you put it out there, it is a library item regardless of whether it's going to be used once or 100 times. All right, so all that preamble, I wanted to get that backdrop just to get us started on what a design library needs, its efforts, what it takes. But let's go ahead and start building out the system in Notion that's going to house our library. This might be, I already know this is going to be a couple of videos to show how just building the system. And then there's going to be some follow-up videos where we're actually using the system as we are working on the website. All right, so I'm going to start in the patterns table. And like I said, this is just going to be for the admin, for the library team themselves. I want to use a board. And so the meta tags that we want to track, I'm going to rename this as document status, just to keep it separate from the notion of like when we're working on in our sprint system and we're doing something that, wait, that's a better way to say that. I'm working on, like, let's say I'm working on the login box. I've designed out the login box. That is actually the task of the login box. And now this is the document that is tracking whether or how we're building that login box. So it's the status of the document, not the status of the task. I don't know. It makes sense in my brain. Hopefully that makes sense in your brain. I'm going to take out, again, not started and make it blocked. And I'm going to add review, which will allow me to then assign it to different individuals for, like I said, like, okay, can the accessibilities team take a look? Can the analytics team take a look, or what have you? All right, the next thing that I'm going to put here is who it's assigned to, but I'm not using the people that are in my Notion system. I'm using the people that are in that database that I've created. So this way that relationship will tie back to that individual. And then group. And for this, I'm going to create a relationship back to the same table. Okay. This will make sense in a minute. Don't worry about what that looks like right now. It will make sense, I promise. And then the last one is the pattern type. So is it a style, is it an element, is it a component? And I'm not going to build these out now. I'm going to build these as I do the different templates for these things. All right. I left that in review. Let's take that out. Let's just get rid of these just to clean it up and make this page full width. I do want to put one more view of this table, which is going to be by pattern type. Okay, so we have the different views so that we can go in and see we can go in and just look at it by the type or look at it by the status. All right, so global standards, I'm not going to build this out now, but global standard would be, advice at a higher level. So for instance, when we talk about, why we do a particular thing, like SEO guidance might be something that we put, at the global level, printing guidance. So, when we print globally, there are things that we shouldn't print. So if a user for some reason decides that they're going to print a page that has functionality like search functionality, we're not going to print the search functionality. We want to print the records that are the result of their search. So all that form stuff, the filters, the view by, the sort, all that stuff should not print out. So we're going to put printing guidelines. So that's kind of where the kind of things I would put in global standards. But let's work on styles. And so here I want to go ahead and put that patterns table. Oh, I meant to put it so I want to put it in as a list. Oops, I duplicated instead of deleted. Delete. Delete. So I'm putting this as a list here because I want to emulate the idea that it's like a wiki, like I'm going down the pages. And I'm going to filter this by the type. I might have to create the styles type first. Yeah, let's create the styles type. So let's create a new one. One of the styles that we'll need to have is color. Okay, so now I can filter by styles. Okay, so color, typography. Iconography. Logos. So now logos would live, you know, if we go back up to the top, they live here in our brand guidelines, but these logos should be the ones that are made to already be that image format that we need to use on our web properties. So maybe it's it's already been chopped down to the right sizes that we need. There's color versions and black and white versions. So, you know, whatever we need to support the website, that's what lives here. So that's going to be brought down from the brand guidelines. Now, by doing this, so what I want to see here is not not the styles, but I want to see the status, maybe who it's assigned to as well. That might be interesting. All right, so if we said that we are working on this, and let's say that Becca is working on this, right? Once this is finished, we can pull this out and have it be in page. So this is how we're going to format our wiki. So eventually this table wouldn't be here. It would just be these wiki pages where we can go down into the page, and however many levels we have to do. So group by would be a way that we do by levels. Interesting note, like if you see here, there's nothing here that indicates those meta tags I had. But if I pull this back into the table, it remembers all that came back, right? And there might be some overview I put here. I don't know. Styles is pretty straightforward. It probably doesn't need an overview. Let's go ahead and do our elements. So again, we want it as a list. Let's say an element is going to be the smallest objects that we can have on a page. So if you're familiar with like atomic design, this is that thought process. So the smallest thing that we're going to have is this element. And so I'm going to have an element of a button. Okay. And so we want to call this a pattern type of element. And we're going to go ahead and filter this to only show elements. All right, I'm going to try something here. So I want to use, styles are you know, each of those style pages are going to be different, but my elements should actually be very similar in the things that I want to talk about in this space. So I'm going to go ahead and create my elements template. And element. So for design, I could either use a color comp here or like a code pin embed. The nice thing about a code pin embed is it's going to render, and I'm suggesting code pin, that's what I use, that's what I like to use. There might be other things out there that you can use, but the code pin embed will allow me to render what this thing looks like visually, while at the same time giving me the code that I can replicate this, copy paste it into whatever I need it to do. If there's any functionality, and then if I used a code pin embed, I don't need this, but if I used a color comp, then I should probably put here, the code snippets. And then I could use the code embed module to write out the code. So for instance, if I'm doing this, you can see that it does the syntax highlighting for me. And then also I can just copy this to clipboard and use it somewhere else. Okay. So that's going to be the template for our elements. So let's go back to that button and say use that elements. And then maybe I have, what's another one? Input. Tooltip. Maybe I want to create an element group. So in that case, I'm going to say like form elements. And instead of doing the element template, maybe I want a new template that's going to be element group. It's still an element. But this time, instead of writing all that information, I want to put that table. And for the filter, oops, I still want it to be a list. And I'm going to remind people to filter Okay, so if I go back now to form elements, I'm going to say element group. And in my filter, I'm going to put the form. Okay. And if I come back, I'm going to say like this input, it belongs to the form. Okay. And for this filter, when I come back, I'm going to actually say like group is empty, so that you're forced to go into the form elements to see the form elements. It's kind of not necessary for, eventually I'm going to pull this out into page, but I could like pull this whole bit out into the page, and then I still have, no, actually you can't do it that way. Take that back, because if you pull that out, it loses the fact that it's linked together. So, but when I'm finished, like when these are done, I could say, okay, this is finished, and I pull it out. And then I could say, this is finished, and I pull it out. And now I've got this wiki page with the wiki page inside. Okay, see how that works? All right. And all right, so that's going to be it for this video. It's getting quite lengthy. So I'm going to come back and do the components in the next video. So yeah, it seems really complicated to set up, but I promise you, like once it's set up, it works like butter. It's really easy and useful to use. It's kind of like how it was complicated to set up our sprint process, as an application in Notion. But then once it was started, it was really simple to use. All right, I will see you in the next video. Bye.